Now, we've seen Numsa break away from the ANC alliance, but I'm going to ask you to do the almost impossible and take us way back to explain what has happened here exactly.
Well, what has happened exactly was back in 1985, there were a number of unions that had emerged from 1973 onwards. They had different traditions, different cultures, different backgrounds, but they had a common idea about the defeat of apartheid. And by that stage, the ANC seemed to be the only political game in town. And so there was talk about, let's ally ourselves with the ANC. A lot of those unions, including Numsa, said this was purely a tactic for that limited period of time, and quite a few thought that too. But now, unions are very important as far as political parties are concerned, businesses are concerned, because potentially they have extraordinary power. So political parties are always trying to get in to manipulate and control them. And one of the parties that has been very successful with COSATU is the South African Communist Party. And their whole strategy is to move into the ANC and use the ANC as a vehicle towards some sort of ill-defined socialism in the future. So they moved in and took over a number of the unions within COSATU, because initially the South African Communist Party and the ANC opposed COSATU because they had the South African Congress of Trade Unions, which was set up by the Communist Party, which had voluntarily gone into exile. So by 1987, they dissolved the SACTU, the South African Congress of Trade Unions, and supported COSATU. And right through until 1993, Numsa was still saying, no, we need a workers' party and a workers' charter to support. A lot of them were confused because trade unions are not political parties. They're not alternatives to the system. They merely pull workers together as workers within a system where you have employers and employees with different interests. They are a reaction to the system and a product of the system, and not an alternative. Some of the trade unions understood that, but by that stage, 18 months ago, the majority of the large unions, most of the unions within COSATU, the leaderships were members of the Communist Party, the leaders were members of the Communist Party, and that included Irvin Jim of Numsa, as well as Zima Vavi of the General Secretary of COSATU. They're not there anymore. We have a bit of lovely Afrikaans term, broeder twist, I think. But anyhow, whatever the reasons, the point is the rank and file were becoming disillusioned. And the big watershed, I think, was Marikana, what happened at Marikana. And a lot of trade unions started saying, no, look, we've had enough of this. Our trade unions have got investment companies, they've become big business. Numsa has a big investment company as well, incidentally, they all do. So there was a bit of a rebellion at a rank and file level. I think this was correctly read by Numsa. And they then said, look, we've got to break from the alliance. Now, the COSATU Constitution allows unions not to be members of the political alliance. They recruited SASBO, for example, the banking union, which has never supported the alliance. So they were perfectly within their rights. But then there was the argument about the internal fight. It could have been political. It was political. It was also personal, regarding Zwelinzima Vavi, the General Secretary. And that became the trigger point. And the executive tried to expel and suspend Vavi. And Numsa objected. Numsa then said, look, we're in a mess. Vavi said, the unions are all paralyzed because of all this internal squabbling and fighting. So what we should do is, accordance with our constitution, we'll get together a group of unions. It must be at least a third, which is 8 or 9 members. They got 9 affiliates, and they said we want a special national congress to resolve all these matters. Now, I think this was playing into a groundswell right across the union movement. But the executive of COSATU, the majority, don't want that. Why not? One can only speculate it's because they feel they might lose. And the Communist Party is very hostile to that because they think it might lead to COSATU breaking away from the alliance. And that's what's actually happened. Numsa then, because COSATU refused, despite the fact the Constitution says they should have called, the COSATU executive should have called a special meeting, refused. 14 months has gone by. In December, Numsa held their own special congress and said, right, we're leaving the alliance. This was then reported they were leaving COSATU. It said, you don't have to leave COSATU. And in fact, Numsa does not want to leave COSATU. There's now pressure from within the executive to try and get Numsa to leave by putting all sorts of pressure on. Because if Numsa leaves, some of the workers in Numsa might say, well, you know, it's only one union, even though it is a big union, the biggest in COSATU, but COSATU is still a federation. It might split Numsa and keep COSATU together. So Numsa is saying, no, thank you very much, we're staying put, and we want that special Congress. And that is what has happened. At the same time, Numsa said, we will act as a catalyst. I think there's a problem with some journalists who don't understand that catalyst means something which precipitates a change but remains the same all the way through. So they are probably the best term is to use facilitation. They're going to facilitate a united front, which they say will be socialist, etc. They don't define that. And that'll be in December. And in March, they will have a socialist conference. It's very interesting because back in 1994, COSATU decided to have a series of socialist conferences and then forgot about it. So Numsa, again, I think, can't be condemned for that.